So, what I'd like to do is go through a number of charts that are being triggered by, and that will be triggered by, particularly Pluto moving through Aquarius, because a lot of what we understand about the world reflects Pluto in Leo. Obviously, not US independence. That's because the US is having its Pluto return. And so we're seeing this triggering of Pluto again and again and again as Pluto passes over. And as I said, that always signifies a kind of a gripping on to power, a kind of a clinging on to hegemony, a clinging on to what was known before, in the face of a recognition that things are no longer functioning, things are no longer working as before. We're seeing the rest of the world really clearly showing up against the United States outside of the EU, which has completely rolled over and playing dead. And we are seeing now a rising of the BRICS countries and all of the other countries that want to join the BRICS, because the rest of the world is pretty much fed up and done with this hegemony, this unipolar world that has been active since the last time Saturn was in Aquarius, by the way. And so we have this very, very strongly triggered Pluto that the United States is since very much the last couple of years, 2020, 2021, and 23 and 24 will continue to be a point of aggravation for the United States. But the most important thing is that in a few years' time, so 25, 26, we're going to see then Pluto approaching the south node of the United States. And that's when things start to fall apart. That's when things start to change much more dramatically. So just to keep that in mind, it's just, again, these are pointers in terms of the geopolitical situation we're in. Russia has two charts. The one that really works very well, several nations have a lot of charts. Like the United States also has several charts, but I find the Sibley chart, which I just showed you, is the one that responds really well to extreme events. And that's why I prefer to use that one. And in the case of Russia, this is the chart that responds to extreme events. And so we're going to see then, as Pluto moves into Russia's seventh house of partnerships, it's also going to conjunct the moon and transform enormous, and it's going to conjunct the north node, transform the population, transform its sense of presence on the world stage in terms of the people. You can see that Pluto has already been very powerfully antagonizing Saturn, and that has been a bit of a friction building since 2019 already, 2020 for sure. And here we have Chiron and Jupiter conjunction as well, which is being triggered by all of these 15-degree markers that I've been pointing out, as well as the 14, almost exactly 15 degrees of Taurus, which is where Jupiter is going to be stationing later this year. It's interesting that the US has its Mars exactly conjunct Russia's Sun. One of the ways that you could see that in terms of a relationship is the US saying, who do you think you are? That's literally like a bullying aspect, Mars on somebody's sun. And that's certainly what has been happening for the past 32 years. I used to work with Russia. I used to work in the European Commission and in NATO with Russia and the former Soviet Union, as well as the Eastern European countries. And when you have seen the evolution of the relationship, it explains a lot of what's going on right now. And it's important to understand that the good guy, bad guy story does not hold up. So, and here again, we have another 15 degrees, very powerfully represented by Pluto in Scorpio. And then the other chart for the Russian Federation is very different. It will anyway also be triggered because Saturn is in Aquarius, and that eventually is also going to be triggered. This is the chart at Moscow on Christmas Day saying, that's it, we're done. We're now no longer a Soviet Union. This is that chart. Okay, so the previous chart is the chart that Russians use to celebrate Russia. It's kind of like their Independence Day, independence from the Soviet Union, and the first sort of declaration of an independent state. But this is actually now the recognition of an actual unit called Russia as a federation. And again, we're going to see a lot of these points triggered quite powerfully as the next couple of years go by, but most especially that Saturn is going to be triggered by Pluto. And when, again, 2025, 6 is going to be when we first start to feel that. And so the descendant relationships, that's also being triggered by Saturn in March. And we have already seen that the Russians have been completely revising their relationships with countries around the world. And we are now looking at Ukraine. This chart is the celebration of Ukraine's separation from the Soviet Union and the establishment of a new country. And so here we also have a very prominent Saturn, which will be affected immediately. It's already under pressure by Pluto. And that is Pluto on Saturn at this point is going to be a complete and utter transformation. This is in their first house. This is that we want to now look at the chart as in terms of houses. I forgot to put the ascendant, but we do care about the houses because it's the natal chart. And so we have now an influence on them, not on the relationships like the Russians have, but on them. And I do foresee, and it's already happening, the complete and utter destruction of Ukraine. As long as this continues, it's going to end up like Afghanistan and all of the other victims of democratic liberation throughout the years. And of course, all of this, whatever is in Leo, is always going to be opposed now by what's going through Aquarius. That Pluto in Aquarius is going to take all of the Leo energy as well as all of the other fixed signs, so Taurus and Scorpio. And so here again, we're going to see over the long term quite a dramatic change. Very, very sad and unnecessary situation. So for India, very powerful change, because that's going to affect their sense of the Indian state, independent from the Raj. All of these planets in Leo are going to be opposed by Pluto as it's going through Aquarius. Noticing the moon has already been very long, already for 3 years or so, has been opposed by Pluto. And this is a big transformation. When we look in the country's chart, we see the people in the moon. A big transformation around the populace and what the populace wants. That's Pluto opposition, very big transformation there. And then we see a bigger shift when Pluto moves in. Now we're going to see the second Indian chart, which is the Republic chart. Now, this is when India says, this is who we are. This is us showing up right now. And in that Republic chart, now, look what we've got, all this Aquarius. We're going to see Pluto also massively transforming the country, especially when we see the sun. We've seen also a very big change since 2008 of India. It's definitely been very impactful with Pluto moving across their 10th house of how they show up in the world. And since 2008, that has been very dramatically different. And so India is in for for a very big transformation here. As I was speaking of earlier, in terms of an individual chart, what happens when Pluto goes over the sun, a very, very big, very impactful transformation. The United Kingdom has the same issue. Now, the Pluto is going to be opposing Jupiter in their chart, and of course it'll eventually be conjunct Venus, but Pluto in opposition to the Jupiter is going to be very much about the economy. It's going to be very much about status as well, and about how they deal with their wealth and their finances and their general abundance, which we're already seeing is really quite dramatically falling apart. And that's because Pluto already crossed the sun of the UK. So they had their own goal by voting for Brexit. And we're seeing that now playing out. That will come more powerfully with relationship to their role in the world over the next few years. State of Israel was established just after the Second World War. So again, State of Israel has a number of different planets in Leo. Most importantly, of course, it's got Pluto in Leo. That is now the Pluto and Leo generation, that post-war generation. And they've got their moon on 1 degree of Leo, which means that Pluto is already opposing that effectively now, because Pluto is getting close enough, but it's really going to be opposing that as of March, April, and then basically bouncing back and forth 2023, 24, and then again in 2025, because it's going to still pass over at the beginning of the year. This is significant because the moon is the populace and how that shapes up. Pluto opposing that is going to transform that. We've seen an accelerated push against the Palestinian community, and just now in the last couple of weeks, we've seen the most far-right government ever in Israel, which was already saying a lot. And it does not bode well, I think, for the Palestinians. Then NATO, we see all of these post-war institutions, they all have this aspect of Leo, Pluto in Leo, and eventually they are going to be impacted by their Pluto opposition, which is a complete and utter overhaul. NATO, if you ever wanted to have a chart for a military organization, I guess this would be the one you would want. So you got all of this pile up here in Aries, including the ruler in Aries. And yeah, so I won't say very much because it just keeps, it's almost a joke. Nonetheless, we see, what do we see with Jupiter? We see where we see the wisdom, where we see the authority, where we see the expansion, and we see that Pluto has been going between that, the descendant and Jupiter, in terms of relating to others. That's the 7th house, relationship with others, and transforming NATO over the last 3 years. They still call themselves a defensive organization, and it's hard to keep a straight face. Okay, and then we've got the World Bank, which is another organization which is in a kind of a free fall and not really taken seriously any longer. And that has also been already in an accelerated decline because Pluto has been opposing their Sun and North Node already for these last 2-3 years. And then again, of course, once it goes through the opposition to Leo, it's going to be booming into all of these different planets that are affecting it very powerfully there. I wish I could spend more time on these things, but okay, this is the establishment of the national security state in the United States, the National Security Act of 1947 that includes the CIA, which is appropriately hidden by the chart. So it's the national military, economy. NSC is the National Security Council, which is the advisory council to the president, for example. And all of that is with all of this very powerful energy here in Leo that is going to be triggered equally powerfully when Pluto opposes. And now that Sun is going to be in most direct opposition in 2020, late 24 and 2025. But I think it's already in orb. And so you see, once Pluto moves into that first degree of Aquarius, we definitely have a really big shift. It's, by the way, that's their part of fortune that's going to be affected as well, which is very interesting. And that's shifting we see in the public understanding of these agencies. And we're seeing very, very powerfully how they are now being shown to be overly, the overreach and the excessive abuse of power is now being much more widely understood by Americans and people around the world. Their overreach includes other countries, which is quite extraordinary since it's meant only supposed to be for the United States, but there we are. And so what do we see? We see in their house of relationship, it's ruled by Mars. So unsurprisingly, we also see that the nodes were already in January of 2022, where they had their nodal return, another nodal return, which is like a renewal or a new cycle, a new understanding. So this has all that the nodal shift through the axis of Taurus and Scorpio has been very powerfully transforming them. It still has yet to meet the Chiron, and that will be maybe exposing that initial flaw, the initial Achilles heel of the US security state. The European Union is going to be very deeply impacted. It has just had its Saturn return last year, 2020. Well, it already started in 2021 and then 2022, and that is going to now be impacted by Pluto. When Pluto moves in there, it's going to hit the part of fortune. I just see that. And so Pluto is going to be impacting the European Union in such a way, I think, that it's going to be reconfiguring it. It's going to be squaring the Sun in 25, 26. And that's significant because that, of course, is, as we've seen, is going to be a revision of the goals, a revision of the purpose and the origin or the reason, the raison d'être for the organization. So the European Union, which is already falling apart, is now in an accelerated free fall as of 2025. So UN Charter, same thing. So it's all, again, coming through the energy of Pluto and Aquarius. It's going to be having its opposition probably 26, 27. It's going to be experiencing that opposition. That's going to call into question the practicality of it, understanding 6th house is obstacles, 6th house is enemies. Sixth house is the, the nitty-gritty, the difficulty, and Pluto is going to be transforming all of that. It has undergone an enormous transformation already since Pluto moved into Capricorn, but even when Pluto was in Sagittarius already, that was when we started to hear talk about a public-private partnership. And so the corporatism of the UN started already when when Pluto was in Sagittarius, but it accelerated when Pluto was in Capricorn. Here's the zinger. This is World War II, 1st of September 1939, when the Germans attacked Gdansk. And so what do we see here? We see that the nodes are going to impact the South Node and Saturn coming up this year. And we're also seeing Jupiter is going to be coming back to the Jupiter return very shortly, in a month or two. And we're also seeing the opposition, the Pluto opposition, which will be very significant. The triggering of all of this energy of the World War II, because World War II has a lot of unresolved issues that are within European countries, within the American Soviet energy, within the European American energy, and so on. And all of this is going to be shaken up, already has been shaken up, and that was back in 2018, 19, and 20, very powerfully. I think actually, no, 19, 20, 21, very powerfully, already with Mars, and then eventually in the Pluto opposition. So again, we're going to see a triggering of all of that energy, very significant and frankly concerning. So Pope Francis, I think also is going to have a reckoning. I suspect that he, if, again, I don't want to predict somebody's death, but he's going to have Pluto moving into his 8th house of transformation, death and transformation, loss, and so on. And it's going to be, and it has already been opposing his natal Pluto. So he's already had for 2 years this Pluto opposition, which has been really wearing him down. So I think that we're going to see also in 2023 and 2024, the Catholic Church in search of a new pope. Whether he retires or dies, it's almost irrelevant, because one way or another, they are going to be needing a new pope within at the most 2 years. So this is another sort of agency, let's say, or organization to keep in mind. I just want to pause here because I've said quite a lot of heavy things, and I just want to reflect for a moment. So perhaps you could close your eyes and feel the words. This is Rainer Maria Rilke, an Austrian poet and writer, brilliant thinker, and one of my favorite poems. So enjoy your breathing for a moment. Let your body relax. Quiet friend who has come so far, feel how your breathing makes more space around you. Let this darkness be a bell tower, and you the bell. As you ring, what batters you becomes your strength. Move back and forth into the change. What is it like, such intensity of pain? If the drink is bitter, turn yourself to wine. In this uncontainable night, be the mystery at the crossroads of your senses, the meaning discovered there. And if the world has ceased to hear you, say to the silent earth, I flow. To the rushing water, speak, I am.